Last night was the 9th Democratic primary debate, but unlike previous ones, this debate took a more contentious tone right from the start. Former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg took the stage in his first debate of the election cycle, and his fellow contenders did not give him the warmest of welcome. Here's some of the key moments that you may have missed.
I'd like to talk about who we're running against. A billionaire who calls women fat broads and horse-faced lesbians. And no, I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about Mayor Bloomberg.
I think we need something different than Donald Trump. I don't think you look at Donald Trump and say we need someone richer in the White House.
In terms of who can beat Donald Trump, NBC did a poll yesterday. It says Joe Biden is best equipped to beat Donald Trump.
We shouldn't have to choose between one candidate who wants to burn this party down and another candidate who wants to buy this party out. Look, my campaign is fueled by hundreds of thousands of contributors,
including 46 billionaires. If there are a few people who make ugly remarks, who attack trade union leaders, I disown those people. They are not part of our movement.
Mayor Buttigieg really has a slogan that was thought up by his consultants. It's not a plan, it's a PowerPoint. And Amy's plan is even less. It's like a Post-it note, insert plan here.
I must say I take personal offense since Post-it notes were invented in my state.
It's not whether he apologized or not, it's the policy. The policy was abhorrent, and it was, in fact, a violation of every right people have.
If we took off everybody that was wrong off this panel, everybody that was wrong on criminal justice at some time in their careers, there'd be nobody else up here.
I'm actually less concerned about the lack of transparency on Sanders' personal health than I am about the lack of transparency on how to pay for his health care plan.
I hope you heard what his defense was. I've been nice to some women.
Senator Klobuchar, my colleague specifically asked you if you could name the president of Mexico, and your response was no.
Yes.
You're literally in part of the committee that's overseeing these things, and we're not able to speak to literally the first thing about the politics of the country to ourselves.
Are you trying to say that I'm dumb, or are you mocking me here, Pete?
Let's just be clear. Missing a name all by itself does not indicate that you do not understand what's going on. And I just think this is unfair.
America is running out of time, and this is our only chance to defeat Donald Trump.
Let us bring in Antjuan Seawright. Ooh, he's clapping.
Yeah,
he's ready
to go.
Chomping at the bit. And Leslie Sanchez as well. Antjuan, of course, is a CBS News political contributor and a Democratic strategist, hence he's raring to go. Leslie is also a CBS News political contributor, and she is a Republican strategist. So I will start with you, seeing as you're making all this noise over there.
It was the boxing effect that carried over from last night.
Is that what it was?
It was the jab
so speaking of that, speaking of the boxing and sparring and all that sort of stuff, so the expectation was that, you know, Mike Bloomberg, it's the first time that he's on the debate stage with these other contenders, that they're going to go after him because he hasn't really been tested, and they did. In your opinion, was he prepared?
He was not prepared. In fact, I used some Sunday school language last night when I said it was a piss-poor performance at minimum. At the end of the day, when you know the wolves are coming for you, you have to be prepared to take on the wolves. I did not anticipate Bloomberg not being prepared, considering the type of organization he has around him, and considering this is not his first rodeo. The interesting thing about presidential debates, or debates period, in politics, they can either help you, harm you, or keep you very, very stranded. And I think this debate did more to handicap Mayor Bloomberg and hurt him than it did to help him, because there was no scenario, there's nothing we can pull from last night that says he would be a great nominee to take on Donald Trump.
But Leslie, when you can continue to spend millions of dollars in buying up ad time on commercials and on people's TV screens, where the majority of the country is not watching these debates, the majority of the country is not focused on the minutia that we are all focused on, can you also, in a way, make people forget about that terrible debate performance because you're spending so much money?
The question is, can the alternatives create enough of a doubt in your candidacy that it makes a difference. So if we are peer-to-peer in terms of you are influencing your friends and neighbors, I like this candidate, I don't. I thought Bloomberg kind of fumbled along in that first debate. He's really not ready. That kind of thing. That has legitimacy to downplaying his momentum, even despite the fact you're seeing this veneer. They pierced the veneer, the marketing veneer, of what he has created. But it's really going to be the kind of grass tops leaders that I think are going to have a tremendous amount of influence in how far he goes.
What I was thinking about when you were saying that, because he is spending all this money on ads, we're talking about primary and caucus voters.
Right.
They're not these are people probably more likely to tune into these debates.
Well, that's the point I was going to make. Here's a couple things. Money can buy a lot of things, but it cannot buy authenticity, and it cannot recover pain that people have felt because of things that have happened that are a direct result. For black and brown voters, people who are impacted the most by some of Bloomberg's previous policy positions, he did not do himself a favor. And in an election environment where authenticity and trust matters, he's going to have to do even more to regain the trust of people. And you're making the assumption that the candidates who gained momentum last night from attacking him, i.e. Elizabeth Warren, will not up the attacks and other candidates because they understand that it's worked and there's blood in the water. So I tend to agree with you that money can change the conversation, but I don't think it would change people's hearts about the policy position.
That's the really good question. It's like, should his analytics and polling team should just kept him just an hour shy of making the debate stage, where we wouldn't be, this would be a completely different dynamic right now.
That's
We'd
right.
just be rolling right into, these high numbers.
But Leslie, let me ask you this. I mean, to Emery's point about preaching to the choir, these are Democrats that are interested in these candidates.
Right.
This battle is going to be for those in the middle, those perhaps conservative Democrats or independent voters who, we've talked about this before, who voted for Obama, didn't like Hillary Clinton, and said, let me take a chance on Trump, and now are thinking, I don't want Trump anymore because it's too much, I want return to normalcy. And so those are the folks that they're going after, these individuals. Sure, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren will grab people who are Democrats and who are left-leaning, but could Michael Bloomberg appeal the fact that he's a self-made billionaire, the fact that, he even in his response to stop and frisk and to some of the things that he was challenged on, look at the people who support President Trump and all of the challenges that he has had with his background doesn't seem to faze his supporters. Could he appeal to enough people to get to 270?
People like a winning horse, right? So that's what they're going to be thinking about ultimately. They're like, he can prepare better for those debates. He's got enough people on staff that can help him articulate that message and counterpunch, have his rejoinders. He's ready to go. So the question becomes, we know there's this progressive pull to the left, right? Can he make it past that? If you ask those particular voters Vlad's talking about, the people that were Obama supporters, voted for Trump, they'll say, I don't want Trump anymore. Okay, what are you looking at? Well, I kind of like Bernie. Maybe, Pete's too young. I'm kind of interested, not Warren. I don't think she can get it done. And they kind of make this judgment in their mind. And then we say, well, what if it's somebody like, Biden, and they said, if it's Biden, I'll vote for Biden. But if it's somebody else, they start to question it. So that's the question. When you have the actual nominee, then they're going to look at Trump in a very different way. And they're going to say, oh, and that's where Trump could come out a big winner. He could come out a loser. But that's where the dynamic with Bloomberg becomes interesting, because it is more of a parallel contrast.
And keep in mind, Vlad and Emery, crawl before you walk, cook before you eat, crank before you ride. In order to get to the general election conversation,
crank before you ride?
Yeah, crank up the car before you ride.
I was like, I was just smiling and nodding. I was like, I'll ponder this later.
You can't just take off without the car driving. But the point I'm making is you have to do step one before step two. And step one is a certain thing that the road to the Democratic nomination runs through black and brown communities, which could be problematic considering the policy path of Mayor Bloomberg. The second thing is, even if that happens, let's say he's able to slide and glide through. If we do not galvanize and energize African American and brown voters to the levels even above where we were in 2018 and 2016, we still do not have a fighting chance of winning the presidency and down the ballot. We saw that in 2016 with Hillary Clinton. And there's no education in the second kick of the mule. We have to win black and brown voters up and down ballots across this country to set ourselves up for success.
So minority voters are absolutely critical, obviously, in the Democratic primary. But the other area that's critical are the working class voters, are the working class, middle class, however you call them. Particularly, Democrats have had trouble struggling with white voters, working class voters who moved over to the Trump camp, but obviously minority, Black and Latino working class voters who kind of get missed in many of these debates, who are struggling with kind of different types of challenges. The one unifying effort is health care. And the one unifying effort, I think, on that debate stage, and that we're going to continue to see parsed out, is how extreme the Democratic Party is on Medicare for all, Medicare or health care for undocumented immigrants. That's not a Democratic Party that many conservative Democrats recognize.
Okay, so in keeping in that conversation, I mean, we've been talking a lot about Bloomberg, but really the person that has been consistently in the lead has been Sanders, right? So let's talk about his performance. And I mean, I felt like he took some sort of hits. It seemed like the criticism was, I know what you've been talking about all along in your entire career, but are you really living that life? But he got 3 homes.
That
nice,
was the most,
lake home,
interestingly enough, that was one of the most tweeted remarks from the debate yesterday. But in watching it, I sort of see Senator Sanders as coming out sort of in the same position that he was going in, which is he's the front runner, and nothing really landed. And it was basically same old Bernie. He's been saying the same thing consistently for most of his career, and even more consistently now that he's running for president again. I didn't see him taken down at all.
You know, Bernie Sanders is much like Phil Jackson when it comes to running his plays. No matter what else is going on in the game, he's consistent with his offense and his defense. And we saw that last night. Ironically, there was only one candidate on the stage, Leslie, who went after him for his record and to clear out a policy divide, and that was Mayor Pete. The 2 clear front runners, if you look at the numbers from the first 2 contests. I suspected or thought there would be other hits that come to Bernie Sanders because he is the front runner. Regardless, Bloomberg does not have delegates. He has not won a contest. Bernie has. I was shocked by that. And last night shaped up to be this new idea of progressivism and this new idea of centrist pragmatism. That was Pete and Bernie. That was the only real display.
The one biggest movement you've seen since 2016 to where we are right now, Bernie Sanders are like, we're going to do this. I'm going to take your taxpayer money, and the government's going to decide how to spend that for you. And everybody's like, I'm going to raise taxes. It's going to cost that, but nobody's going to have premiums. We heard a lot of that with the Affordable Care Act, by the way. You're going to keep your doctor, premiums aren't going to go higher, and we look and see what happened. The difference is now, 4 years later, it's been over 3 decades since Democrats have come forward and said, we are going to raise your taxes. But now they're embracing that idea. Biden, who is the conservative Democrat centrist in there, is talking about, I'm going to raise it $3.2 trillion over 10 years for his health care plan. That's astonishing. And contrast that Bernie's effect has been to kind of open the floodgates on raising taxes. Walter Mondale did that in 1984, and the American appetite is not there for that. We'll see where it is now.
So here's the thing. Pete Buttigieg, he tried to do that compare and contrast. He said, you've got the extreme left as represented by Senator Sanders, and you've got, this billionaire as represented by Mike Bloomberg. Here's this choice that's sort of in the middle. I thought that was sort of unique, and it made me wonder about his strategy going forward, if that is enough to drive that wedge between some of the voters that we're talking about.
Well, I think his goal last night was to try to slow down the momentum so he can gain a media narrative that he has traction still. The bad news for Bernie is Elizabeth Warren had a good night.
She did.
And if her rise could be his demise in some way, shape, or form, because they're actually pulling water from the same bucket. And so if she gains steam, I think she raised like $1 million or some wild number as of her performance last night. If she picks up, Bernie could be put down in such a way going into some very critical contests on Super Tuesday, where if he wants to continue his delegate lead, he has to run the table in many ways. So this fight for the progressive lane on the highway could be a real one shaping up going to Super Tuesday.
Can I just ask you guys real quick, because they're telling us to wrap, but I got to ask something, because I think it's important to people who are following this race, and so that they understand what this means. At the end of the debate, all the candidates were asked about...
Thank you.
Yes, right?
That's the most important part.
So explain to our viewers what they're talking about. In the media, there's always this idea that there's going to be, at the convention, there's going to be a second ballot, and somebody's going to, get up to that point where they become the nominee. all the candidates said that they would challenge that if there were superdelegates and the delegate count, even if Senator Sanders came out on top with the number of delegates but didn't have a majority, that they would be willing to challenge that. And some people pointed out that Senator Sanders helped write those rules. Those are the rules, but he doesn't seem keen with that this time around. So explain what that all means to our audience.
Well, I'll just say this. There's no interest like self-interest. And the fact of the matter is everyone wants to be the nominee. And the system works all the time until it does not work for you. And we've seen that play out in some of the response.
So what are they talking about?
Yeah.
Well, if we get to a broken convention and no one has the necessary or needed number of delegates, if we get to a place to the convention, no one has the needed or necessary number of delegates.
Which is the majority.
Which is the majority. We go into a convention fight. And on first, there'll be several ballots until we get to a place. The superdelegate process has changed thanks to complaints and pushback from the Bernie Sanders wing of the party. And now that system may not be flexible for him when it comes to this convention if we get to that posture. So with that being said, you will see this race drag out longer than people anticipated, particularly if someone's in a close second or third. That's what it means for me.
It was really tough. If you were there at the convention in 2016, that was a tough race. I mean, the Bernie folks came out. They were protesting to some extent. You had to squash that down. We were there, and it was a ruckus in the hall. It was not an easy pill to swallow for many of those Bernie folks. So I think it's going to be leading up to that. And that's basically what they're saying. So the backdrop to that is we're not ready to stop our momentum. We're going to, we're going to keep going all the way to the very end, and it's looking more like a brokered convention. Is
that a tacit, though, acknowledgement that Senator Sanders is the front runner by all of those candidates? Because they're all saying, they're basically admitting that he's winning.
38% of the delegates are going to be allocated on Super Tuesday, so it's going to be really tough for anybody else to start gaining that momentum. And you have a candidate who really has a ceiling in terms of his support. He never has cracked over the high 20s. So that's a reality for the Democrats. You're basically sealing your fate with a socialist Democrat as your nominee. Where does that leave them for the rest of the year? Where does that leave down ballot? Where does that leave people who are deciding to run as a Democratic ticket? What does this mean for the Democratic Party? So these are serious questions, minus the political fight that they have on the floor.
Not to mention, we have to somehow frame out a platform and a messaging from the convention.
And if he's the front runner,
that becomes even complicated. Remember the platform fight we had last time, the Bernie agenda versus the Clinton agenda? I mean, that becomes complicated, and the hard reset that would take place after all of the voters have had their say-so. And people essentially will feel like their vote did not count in a way that they thought. And then it's up to activists who show up at a convention, who can afford to, who've been a part of the process, will have say-so in what that looks like. The formula of complication will blow our mind.
This is so fascinating.
I mean, there's so much to talk about. And also, I got to go out there and crank up my Model T. Because I basically kept thinking about what crank, and I think the only thing you crank is a Model T Ford.
You have to wind down the window.
So good, so good.
All right, Leslie, Antjuan, thank you so much, guys. So we want to remind you, CBSN will have full live coverage of the Nevada caucuses Saturday. Stream us starting at noon Eastern as we preview what to expect. Then, as the caucuses get underway, we'll be bringing you real-time analysis and results when they become available.
And looking ahead to next week, CBS News will co-host the South Carolina Democratic primary debate in Charleston on Tuesday, February 25th. CBS Evening News anchor and managing editor Norah O'Donnell and CBS This Morning co-host Gayle King will moderate the debate. They will be joined by Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan, Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett, and 60 Minutes correspondent Bill Whitaker. The Congressional Black Caucus Institute will co-host. You can stream the entire debate here on CBSN starting at 8 p.m. Eastern next Tuesday.